So welcome everyone. This is Dr. Alana James. Today we're talking about action research for graduate students, and I want to welcome all the people who are in the room today, and also those of you who are watching by recording. Action research is a small branch of what happens, but a very practical one, and very exciting work goes on in this field. So happy to be able to be here today to talk to you. This is the first part of the two-parter, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a second. So in the interest of full disclosure, this happens to be my field of expertise. Even though many of you have heard me talk a lot about how you get graduate work done, which is all the work I do now and certainly another level of expertise. Action research is where I started. My EdD was a study of educators who all were doing action research to aid their students in schools whose family, their students who were in schools and their families were homeless. So these are students who might have come and gone from elementary schools and middle schools and high schools in the United States. And at first, it was just a project in Colorado, and then that led on to becoming a national project. And my memory is we had somewhere close to 10 states participating as part of a federal grant called the McKinney legislation. So it was a big deal. I wrote a lot of articles on it, got my first books and my first journal articles out of it. And it ended up in that movement, I became a mini expert in action research for all kinds of things. And I ended up writing 2 books for SAGE. Those are the 2 books there. One is for people in education who want to use action research. And one is in, I have the doctoral dissertation book. Sorry, it was the second one was education. It isn't the one up there. And then the second one was the participatory action research. I didn't watch my cut and paste as much as I should have. I want to say, though, that these slides are heavily influenced by the work of 2 other people as well. Richard Sager and David Coughlin are also authors I find very useful. Richard Sager is all about using action research in schools to improve education. And David Coughlin is all about and has built a huge reputation in Europe using action research and action learning and a lot of the cousins that I'll talk about in a minute for within organizational development. So you'll see their ideas floating in and out of these, and I have links for them at the end. Well, so what are we going to be covering in this series of 2? So today, I'm going to talk about what is action research, who it's for, a couple of definitions by these 2 other people and myself, and then what do I mean by the cousins? Because research methodology is growing and changing, and people like to change the language of it when they have a sort of new idea. And then that sort of new idea develops its own followers, and we end up with a relationship that's a lot like a family, an idea and lots of cousins. So that has happened with action research. And I'm going to talk about some examples in development, education, health, and business, and give you some beautiful links. If this is interesting to you, then you're going to have some great places to go and check out. I'm going to talk about the basics of how you do it. A lot needs to be said about the how you do it part. And then if you have questions that come up at all through this, please go to www.wooclap.com/action research. 4 of you have already come in with questions. I'll get those answered, and I'll get all the questions that come into that WooClap answered next time as well. So if you're unsure about anything now or through this week, please go to that web address, which reminds me to say that the slides are in your handouts, should be in your handouts. I'm not seeing the little mark. No, it looks like they're there. And so you'll have all the links available to you. And the people here who have written in things, I'll get to those questions as well, and make comments about them. Next week, I'm going to do a cross comparison of finished master's and doctoral studies as an analysis for those of you who want to use this method. There are some tricks in the final juxtaposition of action research into typical academic thought patterns for committees. And that's all, of course, very dependent upon the people you have in your committee. But I'm going to talk about some of the challenges, and we're going to see how other students who have graduated mastered those challenges. So, what is action research? Who is it for? And what do I mean by cousins? All right, let's talk about this. So, David Coughlin, remember, is the man who is interested in organizational development. And he points out in an interview with Sage that there's a lot of definitions. And then I like this, is probably there's a lot of definitions for everything. But at its core, its action research is engaging in a desired action, something you want to do, and people really want to do it together. And you do that in a reflective manner so that you put the outcomes are held to research standards of data analysis, etc. So it's watching a pattern of evolution in a way that researches it as it grows. Other parts of David's writing discuss in length the fact that this is insider research. Most often. Doesn't mean to say that an outsider can't come in and start a group and get something done. That does happen, but you also are influencing the group. You are part of the group. It's a bit messy that way. And so there's some constraints on that go with insider research. And I'll chat a little bit more about that next today. And then we'll see whether or not the ones that are used as examples were insiders, and we can discuss it more next week. But it's something to pay attention to. If you're considering doing this, are you doing it in an organization or in a community of which you are already a part? So that's a consideration. Richard defines action research as a disciplined process of inquiry by and for those taking action. That's very succinct and lovely. The primary reason for engaging in action research is to assist the actor. Could be you, could be an organization, could be anybody, in improving or refining his or her actions. And for that, it's often used as practitioner research. So here's another word that comes into our languaging. And this, quite frankly, academics can use in kind of a put down kind of way. Like, oh, that's just practitioner research. Well, in fact, it's pretty phenomenal for anyone in any job to always hold themselves to a standard of actually researching the outcomes of their work and researching data, collecting data and analysis and publication about the outside of their work. So part of action research is that you're interested in evolution and you're comfortable with full disclosure because it is a messy process, etc. So he says practitioners who engage inevitably find it to be an empowering experience. Inevitably is the correct word there. If you take this on and you're doing it about your own practice, you love it at the end because your practice gets better and you feel stronger. Action research has the positive effect for many reasons. Obviously, the most important is that it is always relevant to you or to the rest of the participants because we're doing stuff in our own lives. We're not just studying an idea that came across us 2 years ago and now we're bored with it. We're studying an idea that we're still part of and we still want to make work. Relevance is guaranteed because of the focus of each research project is determined by the researchers, who are also the primary consumers of the findings. I'm going to say and I think this is a point that others just seem to miss that I find so intriguing, is that this methodology, or one of the cousins, is the closest thing we can do as researchers to study possible futures. So all research methodologies, quantitative, qualitative, whatever it is, we set it up, we have our patterns, we get part of groups if we're doing ethnography, we look into our soul if we're doing autoethnography. We have all these different ways, but all of them, except for this one, study exclusively the past. And there's some lovely stuff about studying the past, but this methodology allows us to project an idea into the future, take those steps to get it done, and then see what happens. So if you're, like I am, wired for helping improvement, then this may be a methodology that speaks to you. And you will find it empowering, because you'll get to move forward and you'll learn about why things are happening the way they are in a way that makes it your own personal abilities grow stronger and faster than certainly anything I've ever come across. So action research allows us to not just ask what had happened, how lives were affected, but what will happen, how can we fix it, what could be done. I just think that's fabulous. Now, let me just take a quick look on cross-sector. One of you is studying cross-sector collaboration in a school setting to encouraging adopting school wellness strategies. Numita, perfect for this. And I'll discuss a little bit about participatory action research versus regular action research when I get to the cousins. So which of the cousins is just the right one? That's just the way you write it up. A lot of the how you do it doesn't change so much. Let's see. Interested in how data are analyzed and distilled for interpretation of results in particular. Adrian, that will be stronger next week than it will be this week. ESL teacher investigating the effects of task-based language in her own classroom is participating in action research. We can take any of the topics that we're going to talk about and research them in many ways. But if an ESL teacher who wants to investigate the effects of her particular language teaching in her own classroom, and she projects her ideas into, okay, this has happened. You could realize you could do that kind of research just looking at what happened last semester. But if you wanted to look at what happened because of what happened last semester, I think I want to try X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to research how they worked. So you have that forward moving idea, then you move into action research, as I see it. Now, you see I've got my face on this slide. This means this is a slide where these are my ideas, and if I am speaking in an action research conference, these ideas and how these others are defined and how we see the world and the cousins are one of those things that researchers like to debate heavily with each other. So opt for debate. This is how I see how the world of this language falling out. I see action research as the basic pattern of 3 or 4, depending on which author you're talking to, steps that lead you into researching the future as you develop it. I see participatory action research as the same thing, except done by a group. So if you're working in a community and the whole group is meeting and deciding what they're doing, and then each part is going off to do stuff, then that's participatory action research. Most likely. There's a couple other words they put in front of. Community action research gets used too. CAR as well as PAR. In my world, it was always PAR. That's just language. But it means the group is doing it, the community is doing it, and they're doing it for the betterment of all. Now, as soon as you do anything for the betterment of all, you get into consensus issues. And you get into dynamics between people issues, and it gets a bit messy, and it works well if you're naturally a good facilitator, or if what's driving you is something big, like you want to save the world along a certain issue. Then those two things help out the messiness. That's just personal experience. Action learning is more used in Europe than it is in the United States, usually used in organizational development when a business takes on learning about itself, and they're a little hesitant to use the research word because the research word puts them into academics. Very similar. Like I said, a lot of this is just how academics like to argue with themselves about words. Appreciative inquiry, definitely a cousin, but I'd say a distant cousin, because appreciative inquiry at its root wants to ask what is working, and then what do we have to do to promote, to produce more of what is working. Whereas action research is willing to take on the ugly, it's not working at all stuff a little bit more easily. Design research, modern language that I'm seeing a lot, really underscored by the same principles. That process is important in the moving forward. And so design research looks at how we design something and then how it moves forward. Very similar. So upgraded language, I would say, maybe a little less emphasis on measurement. People who do it might totally disagree with me on that. And so a cousin. Practice research, just heard it for the first time in an article that I was digging out for all of you. It's new on the block. It's used in information systems. So that's their world. A lot of different language, but we all basically mean the same thing. So this slide just gives you some resources. If that portion is interesting or you want to drill down, with David Coughlin, there's a video of him talking. He's a great guy. He's very funny, little Irish guy. And then there's a ResearchGate publication that I thought, or one of his articles that's up in ResearchGate that I thought you might enjoy. He writes clearly. He's just really looking into. Those are the two books I wrote on the methodology are in Sage, and those are the links to them. One's for education and one's for business, nonprofit, and public administration people. The second one is specifically geared towards if you are a master's student. Because I was teaching business, nonprofit, and public administration at the time, here's how you can put a proposal together, and here's how it can work. So it's very practical at a master's level for kind of getting the work done. Richard's got a couple of things. The ASCD published his book, which is really good on what is action research, and there's one of his YouTubes. And then the miscellaneous, this is from the IS comment that I made. Their action research versus design research was the topic of a conversation in information studies. That a really good methodological piece that kind of discusses the cousins, and somebody did some research around them. So well worth looking into. Okay, let's talk about some examples. This woman is the first one. These again are just, I'm giving you links. We don't have to look at them together. The world peace, the woman that was on the front is the, I've tried to give you a video and a dissertation in each of these topic areas. So the first one is the YouTube. This is a group who are interested seriously in world peace, and they use action research around the world to help make improvements that direction. Just beautiful work. It's the kind of work that makes your heart sing, that researchers are really involved in this way. Underneath that, if you see the PQDT open, that's always ProQuest's open educational resources, and that's a dissertation that went along the community building world peace format. Information services, there's the one on ResearchGate I'd given you before, and there's also a dissertation. Same thing for education, health, and business. So each of those has some document that you can look at that a student used to graduate with, and then some other backup materials. This is for you to dig in deeper. Next week, we will go through these and others, and I will really help you understand what to look for and what are the key questions that will help guide your ship if you're doing this kind of research for your own graduate degree. But this is if you're just kind of mulling it over, these are links worth looking into. So now, how to do it. This is why action research gets, well, okay, again, as someone who's been doing it for a long time, I am continually annoyed at the fact that we still are writing about the how to do it part. But it's really because if 40, 50 years ago, you came into a world that was all quantitative methodologies, and then qualitative started chipping away at things, and we developed some good qualitative methodologies. And of course, now we have a very rich qualitative world. And you all know ethnography and narrative inquiry and autoethnography, and this goes on and on about the different ways we can study human lived experience. But there's only this one kind of small scattering of people who want to study going into the future. And it just gets, there are still lots of methodologists who think that this way of doing research is crap. Shouldn't do it. Or at least we keep writing like we think it's true. So you'll find a lot out there of action researchers telling you how it worked for them. And my experience of it and working with students of it is that your experience will be yours. And at the end of the day, we want to hold your experience not just to the standard of good experience for you, but also to the standard of you advancing your field because you learned something that is worthy of advancing your field. That's what makes it tough. And it's also what makes it really exciting. So basically, we have a number of steps. You can look at my books, you can look at Coughlin's books or Sager's books, or also some of the early writers, and they have steps. This is basically how it goes. First, you investigate the problem. So you have something you think should move from A to B. First, you need to investigate A. Right? First, you need to do the stuff that is pretty traditional, probably mixed methods. You throw at it every measurement device you can think of, and you investigate the problem enough to where you feel like you understand it. Then you decide a few steps that you want to move it forward and how you're going to measure those steps. So it isn't good enough I'll use an example of a student I worked with, a master's student I worked with. He was in a health practice. He wanted to increase the, when they came into credential the health practice, he wanted to increase the safety measurements. So he called together his staff and they talked about safety in the health practice, and they looked into the parts that were seen in the last credentialing that they could use some improvement. They thought about some improvements. Okay, now most people at this point just go ahead and do the improvements. And this is where action research is different. You go ahead and think about the improvements, and then you decide how you're going to measure the improvements. Because oftentimes, before you measure improvement, you have to have a better baseline of what's happening right now. So you might put off a measurement a little ways to get a good baseline. Then you put in the improvement, then you measure it, then you really have data that shows the improvement. So raise your hand. Are you with me? Is this beginning to make some kind of sense to you? The challenge is in how do you measure the improvement. And you have to catch it quick on the before you begin side in order to get a good measurement. But if you do get a good measurement, you've made great strides for your field. Really, it's a remarkable experience. And in fairness, it's not easy. And so we'll look at the things we investigate next week, and we'll decide for ourselves how much we think they did that. But that's what they're shooting for. Okay, then you take those measurements. You do the same thing everybody does. You pick up your data and you analyze your data. And frequently it is mixed methods data. So you're probably working with some qualitative and some quantitative measures. So you get the same kind of results and findings that you get from any research. But then, and this is the other significant difference, you reflectively and reflexively consider the results. So reflectively considering the results is pretty much what the discussion section is in a dissertation. You look back at the literature and you look back at what happened, and you reflectively think about what went on, and you call that findings. But reflexivity is when you consider what your part in that was. And I think this is critically interesting. As action researchers, we accept that we have impact on our world as we are doing research. We accept that the things that get measured grow, and that there are things that we do because we are focused on that actually cause that growth, and we consider that. I think this is critically important and this is used in areas like juvenile adjudication, kids going to jail. And then you study why kids are going to jail. You think about things and you study kids going to jail, and then all of a sudden you have more kids going to jail. It happens in that particular area. And researchers seldom say, what did I have to do with those results? In action research, we're held to the standard that we do that, that we reflexively consider our impact on that. Okay, now that's the general 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, but it gets so much more interesting and complicated than that. So each one of these, this is the steps. This is the diagram I use to talk about the steps. Everybody's got a different diagram. And learning can happen within learning. And steps will happen within steps. So let me go back to the one I came up with earlier about the man who was studying his medical practice. He wants to, his long-term goal for this action research is he wants to put in place some improvements and then be able to measure whether or not they improve the safety of his staff and his offices, and ultimately the marks he get when the standards people come in and investigate him. Okay, but so he could go through just one, he could do that. And if you were just a business person, you do these steps. But instead, he has to first take investigation and take all 4 steps through the investigation. So here's how it goes. I want to move our safety forward. Well, first I need to investigate our safety issues, okay? And then but in order to do that, I need to plan and execute the investigation. How am I going to do that investigation? Am I going to have everybody go out and write about it? Am I going to take pictures? So that has to be planned and it has to be executed. And then it has to be done. That's data collection. And then the group or himself comes together. They look at how maybe he took pictures of a cord that was on the floor and could cause somebody to trip, whatever it is. The data is collected, it gets analyzed, and they reflect on what they learned. They reflect on how they noticed some things, other people noticed other things. And so the whole investigation step in the bigger process becomes its own smaller loop. Same thing with plan and execute. We've got our investigation. We've gone through the loops. We've come to reflection and reflection on that. We think, okay, we're going to do something. Now we're into plan and execute. Well, our investigation part of plan and execute is that we go and look to see what other people in similar ways have done. That's the investigation part. Then we think, oh, we kind of like this one. So we plan for ourselves. So now that we've got the plan and execute kind of planned, do we move on and we complete the cycle with data collection and analysis, or how does it go? What I'm getting to is that when you're actually doing it, it's called messy. Writers will tell you that action research is messy. Well, this is what makes it messy. It's holding our thoughts to a process, capturing the process as we go in a way that later on we can tell anybody about it cogently, and also continuing to literally live and work this routine. Okay, so by now I may have confused some of you. And I'm ready for that. And I'll give you some minutes to think about how that might work out for you, because you're here, you are thinking, will this work? Or for me, I'm in this field. If I investigate it, what would it look like? If I planned and executed it, what would it look like? You might have some specific ideas, and that will help us all tease it out. And welcome to the people who joined us later. This is being recorded if you joined us after the beginning, so you'll be able to catch up if you need to. Jennifer says, sounds tricky for doctoral research, but fun and rewarding at the same time. I think that sums it up. Tricky, yes. Tricky actually doesn't have to be as tricky as it could be. If you just go into this blind, and you're now at the end of your dissertation and you're trying to figure out how you write it up, that's a little over tricky in my mind. But if you know that there's some tricks as you go along and you're prepared for them, so you're not trying to backtrack and get data later because you didn't realize you nearly needed it, then fun and rewarding is it. Totally it. I mean, this research methodology is interesting enough that it has kept me doing research for 15 years of my life, because it always helps me uncover new ways of talking about what we're learning and new ways of holding our own feet to the fire of being good researchers. All right, how about the transformation of a quantitative study, research study science, into a qualitative research for a dissertation? Undergrad thesis into EDD. Well, Michelle, as a practitioner, as a quantitative practitioner, who wants to then go back into the quantitative research to uncover a qualitative edge. That's a process. It's an educational process. And if you are in education, yeah, you are, undergrad thesis into EDD. Yes, quite possible. Understanding, of course, that the questions you answered in quantitative research were not about lived experience to the same degree that your qualitative research would be. So but yes, could you use action research to be the foundational piece of your journey, so that and as a practitioner, you're talking about your journey as well as your outcomes? Works, absolutely could work. Could I elaborate more on reflection? Okay, yes, I can. I'll use my own research as an example. I study whether or not the professional development that we put out for all of you, masters, PhDs, etc., multiple universities, actually has an effect on whether or not you complete easily and well. That's the basis of my research. But all research has within it bias. And I got my life and my guts and a whole lot of my investment in the idea that these things in fact will work. So my reflection is at the end, when I'm looking at my data, to what extent has my natural tendency to want to see the positive data skewed my results? And I have to, that holds me, reflection with an X holds me to going back and looking for disparate data. Or now that I have a team around me, asking my team, am I studying this in gold? Or what are our outliers telling us? And what about the people who never open an email from us? And what about the people who come to a webinar and drop out after 10 minutes? Those are the reflection points. How much did my wanting a certain outcome and always looking for the data that shows that outcome actually not give a neutrally good picture about the potential of professional development for graduate students? It's a tough thing. You have to look in your hardest heart at what is, what's for you. Now, on an easier one really is a person working with adjudicated youth, kids who had been in and out of juvenile hall, and were they going to rescind, and maybe they're working with social workers. Again, would have to look at your stories about students who didn't rescind, who did well, but those were probably your clients. So how much are you studying the good effect of your clients rather than the good effect of the system you work with, because you have your personal impact, and how much does that personal impact give you positive results, and somebody else who didn't have your caring wouldn't get those results. Those are two examples of reflection. And if you're interested more, you can write to me. There's some people, you can even do a Google Scholar search on reflection with an X, and you'll come up with some people who describe it really well and have great examples. Excuse me, Nomita says, so sounds like you're deciding on a path forward, anticipating results, hoping results, yeah, but there's a reason you're going forward. So you want to, and then you're preparing for both the unexpected and the expected results with a mechanism to share that experience. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good starting place. Okay. That's taken us through the people in the room. So thank you very much for coming along with us on that. Now, let's look at the questions that came in on WooClap. And again, to remind you that you can go to, all the way through next week, wooclap.com/action research, and you'll get a screen. You can do it on your phone as well as your desktop. You'll get a screen. It'll ask you what questions do you have, and you can put in your questions. Oh, Patty wants to know, can numbers be very small? Numbers of people? Yes. Yes. You can work because of the moving forward aspect. Yes, Patty, possibly, depending on your lots of other things that, so you could actually even write that in, giving me some specifics as a WooClap, and I can address it more in depth next time. But the potential is there for small numbers, because it's a potential, it's basically a mixed methodology. So you have some leeway. And then, which is why I question using my undergrad as a basis. In the EDS program I'm now in, I want to elaborate on the qualitative results of a STEM adult learning. Well, you know, you have to decide a couple of things when you're going for this that Michelle's question brings up. Why would you do action research instead of a case study? Because you can do a case study of elaborating on qualitative results of a STEM adult learning, a pretty straightforward case study. And then you might want to make it more interesting by making it a narrative inquiry and bringing along some of the work of David Bogie, and so you can have a really rich research experience and not go near action research. And in that case, I'm wondering if it might be better, because nothing in your writing so far, Michelle, points to the future. All of it points to the past. And you could go back to those STEM adult learning people and say, how was it work? Now, if you want to go into STEM adult learning saying, we had these results in the past, and so now I'm going to start an action research to figure out what I might do differently, and to do that differently and to test it out differently and to evaluate it, then you're more on those lines. So yes, you all have a big world of research methodologies to choose from. I basically recommend that you choose the easiest one that's going to get the job done. Because if you get too involved in a really involved research and it doesn't have a specific reason for being that the others didn't have, I would say go to the easiest. Your first and foremost goal is to get out of here, and then to move on with the rest of your life. I've seen beautiful ideas get so complex, the poor person got bogged down, and then it became very tough. You use action research because you have you're a pragmatic person and you want to show something works in a way others can follow, and you have an idea that you want to see move forward. No other research will give you that. And no other research will hold you personally to it as much. And that has its own charm and self-awareness, metacognition aspects to it that are lovely. But if you don't need those things, don't do this, because this is a bit messy. You have to really know where the traps are so you don't fall into them when it comes to actually getting out and graduating. Talk more about that next week. So let me address these questions. What is the hardest part of doing action research for graduate work? There's a couple. One is that based on your committee, especially if you're at the PhD level, you have to warp. If your committee is not aware of the iterative nature of action research, I don't think I discussed that very much. Action research does many cycles. I think I was getting into that with the learning within learning, steps within steps slide, but you're going to do this 2 or 3 cycles. And that's difficult to write up. It's difficult to write the results up. Do you write how each investigation went, and then how each emphasis went, and then how each measurement went? Do you write them in cycles? There's some challenges with that. And if your committee doesn't have a methodological strength here, they're going to push back on some of those choices, and it's going to be difficult. So that's one thing that makes it a bit hard. Another thing, this was somebody I'm working with right now, found that she's doing community action research, and her community members left. One moved away, one had a sick mom, that kind of thing. Stuff happens to your group, and that can be tough. And then we'll look next week. I'll be on the lookout as I do a comparative study for what other action researchers have done on what might have made their study hard, so we can talk about how they got past it. Jennifer says she's scooting out a bit early to head to a meeting. Thank you. Good luck. Good. Thanks, Jennifer. Have a good meeting. Maragi says we use community-driven action research to make school meals in our school district more culturally responsive. What a cool, that's a great. really good use of action research to make school meals in our school district culturally more responsive. Excellent. Having difficulty with lit review, finding articles in nutrition and health fields. Actually, yes. Next week, we're going to talk about lit because lit doesn't have to be action research driven. It can be specific to the other topics. So we'll talk about, thank you for that question very much. I will make sure I pin it down next week, especially because, but basically go off on this like you're doing just a normal lit review about school meals and culture. And then, and then the specificity of tying in action research to that becomes a subsection of the lit. You can use it just in general. You can use action research as a methodological discussion in a lit. So you can discuss the lit of action research, just like you discuss the lit of a theoretical background in a larger literature review. And then the other literature review is just on your topic areas. I hope that makes enough sense for you today. If the problem is complicated or complex, but you want to start to create a path to solutions, how do you simplify it enough to make a good thesis? That's a great question. And action research is really good for that because action research allows you to do a iterative cycle on the complicated or complex parts. So you can learn about them and separate them out a little bit. And then in the next section, design a solution, a path solution that will most easily address a few of the complexities. So and then you can end with a recommendation that other people carry on those iterations to complete the task. So it's really good for that. What is the advantage of action research? The advantage is the future and moving forward. And why should you consider it? You should consider it if I thought of something that wasn't very, let's see. From my point of view, regular research spends a lot of time, a lot of time looking at the past. And while I know we can learn from the past, I also see our world as an evolutionary place. And that so many keen minds, 60,000 PhDs graduate every year in the United States. So 60,000 people with really keen minds may have studied the past rather than potentially studying the potential movements that will take us into a better future. That's what I think its magic is. We have some big issues on our plate right now. For instance, AI and the ethics of AI in our world. That's a good action research study because it's hitting the ground now. It doesn't have a solution. It's wicked or messy at the very least. Action research can help us sort these things out. And what do they mean when they say action research is messy? Well, it's messy because of the wheel within the wheel and the iterations. It's messy because kind of wrestling it back into background lit methodology results and findings at the end is not easy. So if your committee is very conservative and they really will, and all of your indications from your program and your school is that you're writing to background lit methodology results and findings, then you need to be really good at organization to get action research into that without just making you brain dead in the challenge. It's also messy because you're working with people, frequently working in community settings with people, and that involves all of their lives and everything else that goes with it. So Those are the answers to those questions that have come in so far. Let's see what else is in the room. The idea of several phases and defending each one. No, you don't have to defend each one at thesis, Patty. That's all just results. Okay, so if I was doing any other mixed methodological study, I would have my quantitative evidence and I would have my qualitative evidence. I would lay them out either mixed together as they both led to the answer to one of my questions, or in a chapter that was quantitative and in a chapter that was qualitative, depending on which was the better way for my reader to understand my results. If you're with me so far, same thing is true of action research. You would put it together in, here's all the actions I took and here's all the results we got, results pattern, or here's my first cycle, here's my second cycle, here's my third cycle, written up as such. And that would depend again on whether or not you had an action researcher who had used that methodology, and it was just the easier way to write it. It's really the results chapter that changes. If I analyze the problem, provide an intervention and reflect, and be reflective of the results, is that sufficient? Probably what we're going to see next week, and you're going to have, Patty, you're going to have models to look at next week to decide if they just seem too complex or not. People who have graduated, who have owned this methodology as part of their PhDs. But is it enough? Well, what is enough, really? When we talk about our results, we have to give enough of the results we had to let our reader know where we are taking them in terms of findings. Will we have more results than we talk about? Absolutely. In good research, you always have lots of threads you wish you could follow, or you partially followed, or you partially got done. So in that, yes, can you hone it down? You make it sufficient? Well, you'll have to decide next week. And I've given you some links right now. You can go look at some finished dissertations, and then you can see. Does it seem like it's more? I don't know that it's more work. I just think it's a work that requires a strategic mind. Again, it's easier if you know where your challenges are going to be once you get started. And how much time should be considered when doing an action research study? Oh, Lauren, I really like your very good nuts and bolts questions. I have to compare it to other research studies. It's probably mixed methods. As often as not, it's either qualitative or it's mixed methods, I think. We'll see next week if I'm right when we do a good cross-section of lots of fields. And what do we know about research methodologies? Well, we know that quantitative takes a bit longer to get right at the beginning. And then once you get your data in, you analyze it much quicker than you analyze qualitative data. So it's probably the fastest. Qualitative, pure qualitative, definitely the slowest, because the analysis of qualitative data is just time consuming. Rich, wonderful, don't get me wrong, but time consuming. And so action research will be somewhere in the middle, depending upon how you choose to measure. And that's that whole, let me go back just to give you the visual again. This, when you plan and you decide what you're going to execute, you are deciding what your measurements are going to be. Dependent upon whether you can get some measurements that are quantitative in nature, that will aid your data collection and analysis. So this inherently doesn't take any longer than the others. It just holds your record keeping to different. You have to do a little journaling about your investigation. You want to keep a journal when you do action research. You want to you want to hold yourself to these steps. You want to be able to go back with data about these steps and what you were like at each one of them in order to reflect on that at the end. And then you can write it up. You can write up all the ones, all the twos, all the threes, and all the fours separately in a results chapter. Easy enough. Good questions. Anybody else have a question? Raise your hand if you do. We're coming up to the end of today. A little bit of news. We have another. Doris says, I'm a little nervous about how common sense this seems. Doris, yes. Don't be nervous about it. Embrace it. Theoretically speaking, action researchers are pragmatic. And we want research to add up to getting something done. Pragmatic thought. And if you look into the history of pragmatism from the 1920s on, it's housed with very great people who just wanted to get something better. So that's the theoretical base we often tie back to. And so common sense goes hand in hand with that. And if it seems common sense to you, seriously consider whether you will have a study you like, because for those of you out there who this seems like, well, duh, probably you're natural action researchers. I haven't heard of Yvonne Crody's model of action research, Patty. If you have anything by her, or links or whatever, please send it to me at alana@pd.education. I'm writing that in. Always interested in what new people are saying. There are also really great research groups. There's an educational action research group, and SAGE has journals on it, and anything else. So just a few things as some of you are heading out the door. There is a newsletter coming out this week with all the webinars for this month. Will come out to you if you have one of our university accounts. It'll come out this month. If you don't get it and you want to be on our newsletter list, please write me an email, alana@pd.education, and we'll make sure you're on some kind of list. Motivation. If motivation, getting this, keeping it going is of interest to you, and we think that it's good to start every week with a boost, you can follow that link and you can opt in for the Monday motivations. If writing is an issue, we're strongly recommending you consider the 10-day academic writing boost. Professor Maria did 10 short videos on issues in academic writing. They come day after day after day for 10 days. That's a good way to just get your head on straight for academic writing. That's the link to get you started. And dissertation or thesis issues, we have the opt-in for PhD Scholars Group. You can also join any of the PhD Scholars Friday sessions that are going on right now, and you'll be given access to a really in-depth range of tools to help with dissertation or thesis issues. So that's us for today. Now, some of you are still left, so there may be questions upcoming, and I'll just hold off a little bit on turning off the recording to see if any. Raise your hand if you want to add a question or you have a thought going on. I'll certainly hang out for a little bit longer. Lauren, you're welcome. Michelle, excellent. Patty, great. I'm glad this is useful to you. For those of us who are wired for this, this is very interesting work. It's not for everyone, but it is very interesting. And you'll be on a path that really, really is great. Anybody else in the room have a question or a comment? Going once, going twice. Raise your hand. It's in the chat box if you want me to wait. Otherwise, we're coming to the end of our time. I really appreciate all the couple hundred people who signed up and who are watching either live or by recording. And Lauren, put your questions up in the Woo Clap if you would, because your questions will help other people have answers too. So for this next week, definitely email further questions, but don't email them. Put them up in wooclap.com /action research. And then we'll let everybody get the wealth of that. Thank you very much. Patty, you're fully welcome. And saying goodbye to all of you who are watching by recording as well.